The passage introduces Felix Segala, a former FBI agent known for his exceptional communication skills in difficult negotiations and hostage situations. Scientists were interested in studying him to understand how to teach persuasion and communication. When meeting the scientists, Felix did not seem remarkable at first, but engaged them in casual conversation by asking questions about their personal lives and sharing stories of his own. This created an environment of openness and trust. Felix explained that his technique involved listening closely, asking questions that elicited vulnerability, and reciprocating personal details. This allowed conversations to explore meaningful topics and for emotions to be voiced openly. Anyone can learn these super communication skills through practice. The book aims to outline Felix's approach and how readers can improve their own difficult conversations in life and relationships. It introduces the idea that some people have a unique ability to make others feel heard and provide comfort through empathetic exchange. In summary, the passage introduces the concept of super communication skills through the example of FBI negotiator Felix Segala, who was able to build deep rapport and trust through active listening, vulnerability, and meaningful personal exchange. The book aims to break down his techniques for readers to improve difficult conversations. Conversation is a key way that humans connect and communicate, but not all conversations are meaningful. Meaningful conversations feel wonderful when they go well, but can be frustrating when misaligned. There are actually 3 types of conversations: practical, decision-making, emotional, and social. We often move between these unconsciously, but to connect, we need to be engaged in the same type of conversation at the same time. Supercommunicators understand this and can detect the type of conversation happening to engage appropriately. Their goal is a learning conversation where each person understands the other's perspective. The story about Jim Lawler highlights the matching principle. Meaningful conversations only happen when parties are aligned on the type of conversation. Lawler struggled as a CIA recruiter because he didn't match candidates' personal, emotional conversations with his practical recruitment approach. Understanding conversational alignment is key to connecting. Jim Lawler was a CIA recruit who struggled to make connections during his first assignment in Europe. He meets a woman named Yasmin from the Middle East who works in her country's foreign ministry. Lawler tries to recruit her as a spy by offering her a job, but his boss insists he be upfront about working for the CIA. When Lawler reveals the truth to Yasmin over dinner, she is horrified and refuses to help, knowing it could get her killed. Lawler's boss is angry since he had already claimed she was recruited. Lawler knows he needs to gain Yasmin's trust, but has no idea how to connect with her. The passage then shifts to discussing research on communication and how we form connections through conversation. Factors like neurological synchronization and understanding how our words and behaviors influence others are examined. While the mechanics are complex, creating genuine human bonds is key to persuasion. Lawler realizes he has one more chance to break through to Yasmin, but isn't sure how to establish the kind of meaningful rapport that could change her mind about the dangerous risk of working as a spy. The story transitions to introducing a music student turned researcher who studies synchronization in communication. The passage describes research on how human brains synchronize with each other during social interactions like conversation, humming together, solving puzzles together, etc. This synchronization is known as neural entrainment. Some people are better than others at promoting neural synchronization. Researchers refer to these individuals as high centrality participants, or core information providers. Sievers conducted an experiment where participants watched confusing video clips alone and in groups. Groups with high centrality participants had higher neural synchronization. High centrality participants spoke less than dominating leaders. They asked many questions, repeated ideas, admitted confusion, encouraged others, and made jokes. This helped the conversation flow, and others speak up more. The key difference was that high centrality participants constantly adjusted how they communicated based on others' responses, promoting greater neural alignment in the group. Their flexible style of engagement helped the group synchronize their thinking more. Researchers have identified 3 main mindsets or types of conversations that occur: decision-making, what's this really about? Emotional, how do we feel? And social identity, who are we? Different neural networks and brain structures are activated for each mindset. Effective communication requires recognizing which mindset is being used and matching it. High-centrality participants in group conversations were found to be adept at matching others' conversational styles and mindsets. They subtly influenced groups without others realizing. Matching involves understanding what someone is feeling, wanting, or concerned about socially, then sharing yourself in a way that aligns. This helps create genuine connection and understanding between people. Matching is not merely mimicking, but requires knowing how to share yourself authentically in response. It leads to more harmonious interactions by reducing miscommunications that arise from different conversational mindsets. The ability to recognize and match different mindsets is an important skill for supercommunicators to have in order to facilitate understanding between people. Lawler was a CIA recruiter who was trying unsuccessfully to recruit a woman named Yasmin. He had revealed he worked for the CIA, causing Yasmin to flee. This would be his last potential recruitment after a year of failure, jeopardizing his job. He convinced Yasmin to have one last dinner. She was troubled about returning home without accomplishing her goals. Lawler tried joking to cheer her up, but it didn't work. He recalled a past sales experience where opening up emotionally connected him with a client. At dinner, he decided to share his own insecurities and frustrations with Yasmin honestly instead of manipulating her. To his surprise, she agreed to help the CIA after finding they understood each other. Yasmin became one of the CIA's most valuable sources, communicating secretly for 20 years. Lawler later became one of the CIA's most successful recruiters by learning to form authentic emotional connections through matching mindsets and sharing vulnerabilities, unlike his early manipulation attempts. This approach is now taught within the CIA. CIA recruiters are taught techniques for effective communication and synchronization with others. These techniques aim to improve listening skills, pay attention to nonverbal cues, and have a natural conversation where ideas are exchanged. A former CIA officer said these techniques are learnable for anyone, not just spies. Once you understand how conversations work and the underlying communication principles, you can apply them to have more meaningful discussions in everyday life with friends, family, coworkers, and even strangers. The officer found these techniques helped her communicate better with her parents, boyfriend, and people in everyday interactions, like at the grocery store. She noticed her coworkers at the CIA also applying these learned conversation skills in meetings. The key is that effective communication is a set of learnable skills rather than a Jedi mind trick. The upcoming chapters will explain these communication principles and how anyone can use them to improve their conversations. Reed is a 42-year-old ex-convict who had been released from prison 9 years prior for serving as an unwitting getaway driver in a robbery. Since his release, he had no further legal issues and was considered a model citizen. He was arrested for illegal gun possession after filling out a mail-order application to become a private detective, receiving a tin badge and instructions including to exercise and buy a gun. He followed the instructions literally. At trial, evidence showed Reed has a second-grade reading level and below-average intelligence. A psychologist testified he may not have understood his past crime. The circumstances of his gun purchase and possession were odd, but technically made him guilty of felony gun possession as a convicted felon. The jury must now deliberate on whether to convict him, determining if he knew he acquired a gun as a felon despite his mental limitations or show mercy in their verdict. The story sets up the conflict they must resolve in deliberations. Dr. Duhigg is an oncologist who treats prostate cancer patients. For most low-risk cases, he recommends active surveillance, which involves regular testing but no immediate treatment. However, many patients reject this advice and insist on undergoing surgery, even though the risks of surgery often outweigh the benefits for slow-growing cancers. This was puzzling to Duhigg. He realized his conversations with patients were failing. He assumed he knew what they wanted, objective medical advice, but was not asking the right questions. Duhigg contacted negotiation expert Deepak Malhotra for advice. Malhotra said Adai needed to ask more open-ended questions to understand patients' underlying values, fears, and what matters most to them, not just present treatment options. When Adai started asking questions about patients' lives, families, and what cancer means to them, he gained more insight into their real concerns and desires. This helped him have more productive discussions about treatment decisions. The key lesson is that medical discussions are also negotiations, and doctors first need to understand patients' perspectives and priorities through effective questioning before presenting options. Dr. Adai was a surgeon who noticed he was performing too many surgeries without truly understanding what patients wanted. He resolved to start asking better questions and having true dialogues. Within 6 months, the number of surgeries he performed fell by 30% as he better determined patient preferences and needs. The conversation describes a jury deliberating a criminal case. Initially, it seems the defendant will likely be convicted based on precedent. However, one juror named John Bowley acts as a supercommunicator. He asks open-ended questions to understand what each juror wants from the discussion. Bowley recognizes negotiation is about determining interests and how the group will make decisions together. He works to understand each juror to facilitate productive discussion. The background provided discusses the work of negotiation researchers like Roger Fisher, who showed negotiations can be win-win by expanding available options, not just dividing a fixed set. Good communicators and negotiators focus first on understanding interests, then facilitate creative discussion on decision-making process. This mirrors Bowley's approach with the juror. The passage discusses techniques for effective persuasion and negotiation using a "what's this really about" conversation approach. This involves asking open-ended questions, introducing new ideas, and reframing the discussion to uncover shared goals and values. 2 key types of logical thinking are identified: practical logic focusing on costs, benefits, and empathetic logic based on similarities to past experiences. Different individuals may be persuaded more by one type of logic over the other. An example is given of a jury deliberation where one juror, Bowley, uses the techniques to shift the momentum from a likely guilty verdict. He introduces new hypothetical scenarios to get the jurors to see the defendant in a new light. Another example describes a doctor, Dr. Adai, who had to understand whether patients wanted a practical discussion based on data or a more empathetic one drawing on their experiences and values to make medical decisions. Framing the discussion appropriately was key to effective persuasion. In summary, the passage advocates for a collaborative approach to negotiations and decisions that uncovers common ground by reframing discussions and exploring multiple perspectives, rather than a rigid focus on facts or positions alone. Understanding the different modes of logical thinking can help tailor persuasive arguments. The story discusses Bowley's efforts to convince the lone holdout juror Carl to acquit defendant Leroy Reed during jury deliberations. Different jurors connect with analytical logic versus empathetic narratives. Bowley shifted to telling small stories to connect empathetically with others. Carl only trusts practical analysis and facts. When other jurors revealed desires for justice ethics, Bowley responded by imagining Reed's perspective. The foreperson changed his vote after imagining himself in Reed's situation during a traffic stop. Another changed after seeing Reed's perspective. Only Carl remained for conviction. Bowley pursued a different negotiation, getting Carl to reveal his deepest value is public safety. Bowley then argued an acquittal could actually promote public safety by sending a message to prioritize real threats over minor technical violations like Reed's. This applied Carl's logic of weighing costs and benefits to argue for acquittal. So in summary, Bowley successfully negotiated with the last holdout juror by understanding his views, sharing narratives to build empathy, and reframing the case using the juror's own analytic framework to arrive at a unanimous not guilty verdict. Bowley, one of the jurors in the trial, uses logical arguments to try to convince the other jurors to vote not guilty. He argues that letting Reed go free is the rational choice if their goal is to stop crime. Another juror, Carl, is still unsure but is thinking about Bowley's arguments. As a last resort, Bowley appeals to Carl's sense of integrity and dedication to the legal process. He acknowledges it may be hard for Carl to change his mind, but says doing the right thing brings self-respect. After over 2 hours of deliberation, the jurors vote. They all vote not guilty, so Leroy Reed will be released. Bowley successfully used logical arguments and bargaining to sway the other jurors to his viewpoint. Nicholas Epley, a psychology professor, was invited to give a presentation to hedge fund managers on improving listening skills. Poor listening can be costly in their line of work. Epley believes the typical listening tips people give, like maintaining eye contact and nodding, are not actually effective and may come across as forced. His research showed that when people discuss intimate or emotional topics, they naturally listen better. This opens up a how do we feel conversation where both parties open up and listen closely. However, directly asking about emotions can feel awkward. Epley has identified question types that don't seem emotional on the surface, but still elicit emotional responses. He wants to teach the hedge fund managers these question styles to spur meaningful, emotional conversations where real listening occurs. His goal is to get them tapping into their innate listening abilities. Nick Epley was a high school football star who got pulled over twice for drunk driving. Both times, the police let him go with a warning. His parents were very worried and tried lecturing him, but he didn't listen. They thought they understood where he was coming from by sharing their own adolescent stories, but it didn't connect with him. He started meeting with a counselor who didn't lecture him. Instead, she asked thoughtful questions that made him reflect deeply on his choices and feelings. This elicited strong emotions and changed his perspective. Epley began opening up to his parents about his feelings too. A conversation with his dad about a past worrying incident strengthened their relationship. Epley realized perspective-taking, like what his parents tried, didn't work on him as a teenager. Simply asking thoughtful questions was more effective at getting him to reflect and listen. As a professor, he wondered if psychology textbooks were wrong. Asking questions may be better than trying to adopt someone's perspective when communicating with them. Psychologists Elaine and Arthur Aaron conducted an experiment where they had strangers ask each other a series of deep, personal questions. This led to surprisingly strong connections between many of the participants. The questions focused on eliciting vulnerability by having people discuss their emotions, values, meaningful experiences, and past hurts, joys. Simply sharing superficial facts about each other was not enough to foster closeness. Vulnerability triggers the psychological phenomenon of emotional contagion, where we unconsciously mimic and share the emotions of others. This helps form bonds between people. The ability of profound questions to generate vulnerability is what makes conversations that explore how we feel so powerful for connecting humans on an emotional level beyond surface discussions. Exploring each other's inner lives through open questions and active listening can provide profound insights and understanding. So in summary, asking deep questions that encourage vulnerability allows for emotional contagion, leading to stronger connections between participants through meaningful self-disclosure and understanding of each other's feelings and experience. The Fast Friends procedure of asking deep, personal questions has been shown to foster intimacy and emotional contagion between strangers. This is because vulnerability triggers an instinctual emotional connection response. However, asking all 36 questions on the list is impractical in real-world conversations. More subtle approaches are needed. Research on successful speed dating conversations found people tended to discuss feelings, goals, beliefs, and emotions. Unsuccessful talks focused more on shallow facts about oneself. Reframing factual questions to invite sharing of preferences, values, and life experiences, e.g., what do you like about your job, rather than just what do you do, encourages more meaningful, vulnerable replies. Follow-up questions are especially impactful, signaling active listening and allowing reciprocity. They prevent conversations from becoming self-obsessed. Asking deeper questions can counter unfair biases by pushing listeners to reevaluate assumptions rather than rely on stereotypes when judging emotional replies. Follow-ups further encourage this reevaluation. So in summary, getting deep in natural conversations involves reframing questions to invite sharing of feelings and life experiences, followed by reciprocal self-disclosure through relevant follow-up questions. This fosters emotional connection and understanding between individuals. The passage discusses how having deep, meaningful conversations that involve sharing personal experiences, beliefs, and emotions can help foster deeper connections between people. It discusses some key points. Psychology research has found that people generally expect conversations involving vulnerability to be more awkward than they actually are. Studies show conversations tend to make people feel more connected when they involve sharing personal information and listening to others share. Questions that invite sharing feelings and vulnerable experiences, like about a time one cried or what they're grateful for, can help trigger emotions and connections even between strangers. Having conversations where both parties reciprocate vulnerability is rewarding. People who ask open-ended personal questions are seen as more likable and popular. It's easier than most expect to ask deeper questions and get meaningful responses. While emotions are important for connecting, not everyone finds it easy to openly share feelings. The passage discusses how body language, tone of voice, sighs, and laughs can also communicate emotions even when words don't. Learning to recognize these cues is important for being an emotionally intelligent listener. So in summary, the passage advocates for having conversations that involve openly and reciprocally sharing personal experiences, beliefs, and emotions as a way to foster deeper connections between individuals. It discusses some of the benefits and challenges of having these emotionally vulnerable dialogues. Chuck Lorre and Bill Prady came up with the idea for the Big Bang Theory while brainstorming sitcom concepts. Prady described a socially awkward computer programmer he knew who struggled with interpersonal interactions. They developed characters that were physicists instead of programmers. The characters would be brilliant intellectually, but clueless emotionally and socially inept. When writing the pilot, they encountered a problem. The characters were designed to be bad at expressing emotions, but sitcoms require audiences to understand character feelings and relationships. Test audiences disliked the pilot because the characters were emotionally confusing. It wasn't clear how to feel about them or their relationships. The show failed to ignite emotion connections needed for a sitcom. Lorre and Prady were given a chance to rework the pilot. They dove deeper into the characters to make their true feelings and nature clearer for audiences. This led to the successful version of The Big Bang Theory that became a hit sitcom by clarifying the emotional elements and relationships between the famously socially awkward yet lovable physicists. NASA psychologist Richard McGuire became interested in screening astronauts for emotional intelligence in addition to psychological screening. Emotional intelligence involves abilities like regulating one's own emotions, empathy, and building relationships. Past space missions revealed issues like crew depression, conflicts, and breakdowns in communication that highlighted the importance of emotional intelligence in space. One notable incident was conflicts between the Apollo 7 crew and mission control. McGuire reviewed old interview recordings looking for clues he may have missed. He noticed some candidates laughed differently, which led him to examine laughter more closely. Psychologist Robert Provine's research found most laughter occurs in casual conversation, not in response to humor. Laughter serves to connect with others and show engagement through emotional contagion. The intensity of laughter matters. Similar intensities convey a genuine desire to connect and bond, while mismatched intensities can signal lack of interest or dominance. Laughter is hard to fake, so it reveals genuine engagement or lack thereof. This supported McGuire's interest in screening for emotional intelligence through abilities like matching others' engagement to build understanding and relationships, even under stress. A study found that when people genuinely laugh together, their mood, positive, negative, and energy level, high-low, tend to match. If one person laughs softly and the other matches that, they feel connected. But if their mood, energy don't match, it's clear they aren't aligned, even if the laughs sound similar. Our brains evolved to quickly gauge others' mood and energy from emotional behaviors like laughing, smiling, frowning. This gives a quick sense of whether they are a friend or threat. Matching someone's mood and energy shows we understand their feelings and want to connect. Terrence McGuire, who interviewed potential astronauts, realized some candidates would match his mood and energy when he expressed emotions, while others didn't. The ones who matched tended to become better astronauts, as they were adept at emotional bonding. He started intentionally varying his emotions in interviews to observe candidates' responses. Being able to connect non-verbally like this through matching mood and energy was important for astronauts working as a team. Chuck Lorre and Bill Prady were given a second chance to rewrite and reshoot the pilot episode of The Big Bang Theory after the first version didn't work out. They made some changes to the characters, removing Katie and Gilda and introducing a new neighbor character named Penny, an aspiring actress. They needed to establish the relationship between Penny and the awkward physicists Leonard and Sheldon, but wanted to do it in a way that showed their difficulties with emotional communication. They came up with the idea of having Sheldon and Leonard repeatedly say hi to Penny with the same energy and mood, rather than focusing on their specific emotions. This allowed the audience to intuit what they were feeling, even if the characters couldn't express it well. In the filmed scene, Penny smiles and cheerfully says, "Hi," while Leonard and Sheldon anxiously and uncertainly repeat "hi" back to her over and over in matching volume and speed. This established their attempt to connect emotionally, even if they didn't know how. This scene helped set up the dynamic and humor between the characters in a way that aligned with what's known about emotional communication, and it became a memorable and important part of the pilot episode. Melanie Jeffcoat witnessed a school shooting as a high school student in 1982. She struggled to understand it for years. After her own daughter had a lockdown scare at school in 2014 due to a suspected shooter, all the old feelings came back. Jeffcoat decided to get involved in gun control advocacy. She attended meetings and protests locally and took on leadership roles. She became a public figure, quoted in the media on gun control issues. Jeffcoat received an invitation to participate in a discussion about guns in Washington, D.C., with advocates on both sides of the issue. The goal was not to debate, but to see if those with opposing views could have a civil conversation, not necessarily find common ground. Jeffcoat was skeptical, but had been working in the issue for years with no progress, so decided to attend, despite her opposition to the views of pro-gun advocates she saw as gun-loving fanatics. So in summary, the passage describes Jeffcoat's personal experience with school shootings and her decision to become a gun control advocate, leading to an invitation to have a cross-side discussion on the issue, which she viewed skeptically, but ultimately chose to participate in. Melanie Jeffcoat, a gun control advocate, agreed to attend an event in Washington, D.C., sponsored by Advance Local and other groups. The event aimed to have constructive discussions about guns and see if specific communication skills could help overcome polarization. The organizers chose to focus on guns as the topic, as it is seen as a classically broken conversation, despite broad agreement among Americans on some issues like background checks. John Godfrey, a veteran and former law enforcement officer who owns many guns, was skeptical but agreed to participate after being invited. He said it ended up being a powerful experience. The event designers drew on research from scholars like Sheila Heen, who studies conflict resolution. Her work emphasizes understanding the emotional aspects underlying disagreements, not just the surface issues, to make progress. The summary focuses on Jeffcoat and Godfrey agreeing to participate in the experiment and its goals of evaluating communication strategies to reduce polarization. The passage discusses how discussing emotions is key to resolving conflicts, but people often avoid talking about feelings during disagreements. They want to seem analytical rather than emotional. It describes a meeting where gun control advocates and gun rights supporters came together in Washington, D.C. during nationwide gun control protests to have an open discussion. The organizers sought to have an honest yet civil debate by first teaching listening techniques. Specifically, they taught looping for understanding, restating what the other person said to confirm understanding and make them feel heard. When people feel psychologically safe that their perspectives are being listened to and considered, they are more willing to openly share emotions, uncertainties, and vulnerabilities. Looping helps create this sense of safety and acceptance. The group then practiced looping techniques by sharing personal challenges and summarizing what others said. The goal was to foster a deeper "how do we feel" discussion and change the dynamic of typical polarized gun debates. Preston attended a group conversation workshop aimed at bringing together people with differing views on sensitive issues. Through a technique called looping, where listeners paraphrased what the speaker said to show understanding, Preston opened up about his painful childhood and difficulty expressing emotions. Despite having opposing views on gun policy, Preston found it meaningful to have an open conversation with a liberal woman from the group. He felt heard and validated for the first time as an adult. The looping technique fostered understanding and trust between people accustomed to seeing each other as opponents. It allowed them to discuss sensitive issues like gun control by first sharing personal stories and emotions. While the initial in-person workshop appeared successful, the online discussion that followed fell apart quickly as disagreements resurfaced. This shows how environments and small conflicts can shift understanding and connection between people. In the 1970s, relationship researchers studied married couples to understand why some stay happy for decades while others descend into unhappiness. They pioneered techniques like analyzing videotaped arguments called the love shrinks. Their research showed couples were generally good listeners, but divorce was still rising, so conflicts must be impacting relationships in deeper ways for some. Researchers studied how happy and unhappy couples fight. Their initial hypotheses that they fight over different issues or that happy couples are better at resolving conflicts were wrong. They found that both happy and unhappy couples generally fight about the same types of issues like money, health, etc. And neither group is significantly better at compromising or resolving conflicts. They noticed couples fight about control, one partner wanting to be in control of decisions, etc. Major life changes can trigger feelings of losing control, which contributes to divorces. A key difference is how happy versus unhappy couples approach control during fights. Unhappy couples try to control the other person's language, topics, gestures. They divorced soon after. Happy couples focus on controlling themselves, managing their emotions, the environment by postponing discussions, and boundaries of the conflict by keeping it focused. This allows them to find things they can control together. Focusing on controlling oneself, environment, and boundaries rather than the other person helps make fights more constructive conversations with understanding as the goal rather than winning. This insight applies beyond marriage to other conflicts. Marriage counseling now focuses more on teaching communication skills rather than just problem solving, due to these research findings on the importance of how couples approach control during disagreements. Stanley advised that conflicts don't always have clear solutions, but engaging respectfully so both sides feel heard can help diffuse tensions over time as the issue is addressed together. A group of gun control and gun rights activists tried having constructive online discussions after an in-person training, but disagreements often escalated online without the bonding of meeting in person. People tried to control others' opinions instead of listening. Moderators encouraged focusing the conversations, using less polarized language, controlling reactions to triggers, and addressing one issue at a time. This started to improve discussions. Godfrey and Jeffcoat found they could have a thoughtful discussion about red flag laws by shaping the conversation, even though they disagreed on other issues. Not all conflicts were resolved, but some participants found real understanding across divides and applied conversation skills in other areas of life. The experience profoundly impacted some like Godfrey to become more open-minded about opposing views. The passage discusses techniques for having productive emotional conversations, both in person and online. It emphasizes the importance of surfacing emotions, asking deep questions, listening carefully, and responding empathetically through techniques like looping for understanding. When responding empathetically, it's important to understand the other person's feelings, needs, and give something back through sharing your own emotions. During conflicts, acknowledging understanding, finding points of agreement, and tempering claims can help show the goal is understanding rather than winning. Online conversations lack vocal and body language cues, so it's important to overemphasize politeness, assume sincerity, acknowledge others' humanity, and limit strong language to have better discussions. Understanding these challenges can help improve online emotional conversation. The key ideas are focusing on understanding others' emotions through questions, listening, and reciprocal vulnerability, as well as adapting techniques for sensitive in-person or online discussions where misunderstandings may arise more easily. The passage discusses social identities and how they can impact online conversations and increase tensions. It suggests several tactics that can help reduce tensions when discussing sensitive issues related to social identities. Underemphasize sarcasm online, as tone and intent are harder to convey through text. Express more gratitude, deference, apologies, and hedging language, e.g., I think. Studies show this improves online discourse. Avoid public criticism, as negative feedback spreads and encourages more negativity more online than offline. Remember, our social identities shape how we see ourselves and how others see us. They emerge from our group memberships and experiences. Studies show social identities can subtly influence our thoughts and behaviors in ways that exaggerate differences between groups. The passage emphasizes that discussing social identities and related issues requires a different approach than just focusing on understanding. More care is needed online, given lack of nonverbal cues. Expressing appreciation and softening language can help improve difficult conversations about social identities and related issues. The writer discusses how social identities can both help us bond with others, but also perpetuate stereotypes and prejudice by dividing people into in-groups and out-groups. Our desire for social belonging and defending our in-groups is evolutionary, as it helped early humans survive. However, not all social identities are equal. Some, like being a doctor, may be more influential in certain contexts, like a medical clinic. The meaning and importance of identities also depends on the surrounding environment. Some people refuse vaccines due to seeing themselves as an outgroup that is skeptical of the medical establishment or authority figures. Being anti-vaccine provides a sense of identity and community for them. Doctors can also fall prey to seeing patients who refuse vaccines as part of an ignorant outgroup. One doctor wanted to find better ways to understand anti-vaccine views and have respectful conversations to help change perspective. An experiment showed that even female math students who excelled were performing worse on timed tests due to worrying about confirming stereotypes as the outgroup in that context, women being weaker at math. Overcoming these prejudices is important. Claude Steele conducted experiments showing that negative stereotypes can undermine performance on difficult tests, even for those who don't believe the stereotypes. He called this phenomenon stereotype threat. In one study, women performed worse on difficult math tests compared to men due to the negative stereotype about women's math abilities. Their awareness of this stereotype resulted in increased anxiety and distraction. In another study, Black students performed worse than white students on a verbal reasoning test due to the negative stereotype about Black students' intellectual abilities. Simply being aware of a negative stereotype about one's social group seems to be enough to trigger anxiety and distraction, lowering performance. Later researchers tried mitigating stereotype threat by having participants describe their multiple identities and roles before a math test. For women who described diverse identities, the stereotype threat was neutralized and their performance matched the men's. Describing only one main identity did not alleviate the stereotype threat. Prompting awareness of multiple identities, rather than just the one targeted by a stereotype, can change the social context enough to diminish stereotype-related anxiety and its undermining effects on performance. Here are the key points. Researchers had Christian and Muslim women in Iraq draw self-concept maps, sketches that depict how they see themselves. Women who drew maps with few nodes, ideas, aspects of self, performed worse on a test under stereotype threat compared to those who drew maps with many nodes. Drawing complex self-concept maps allowed women to perform better when facing stereotype threat. Dr. Rosenblum, a physician, found this research interesting as it related to how doctors can counteract stereotypical physician knows best mindsets. He began making a point to find common identities between himself and patients, like mentioning his family if they talked about theirs. This helped him connect with patients on a personal level and be less defined only by his role as a doctor. The key takeaway is that remembering we all have multiple identities beyond any single role or label can help reduce stereotyping of others and allow for more understanding in difficult conversations. No one is fully defined by a single attribute. Jay Rosenblum was concerned about vaccine hesitancy, limiting the effectiveness of COVID vaccination campaigns. He helped form a group called Boost Oregon to explore new approaches beyond simply providing facts and data. Many groups studying vaccine hesitancy had concluded that motivational interviewing was most effective. This approach draws out a person's beliefs, values, and identities to find opportunities for change, rather than directly trying to convince them. A doctor, Rima Chami, used motivational interviewing with an elderly patient who didn't want the vaccine due to concerns over the science and rumors. She didn't argue with him, but asked open-ended questions to understand his views and identities as a grandfather and religious person. Rather than debate science, she acknowledged his faith and care for grandchildren. She suggested God may have given vaccines as a way to keep people safe. This acknowledged his overlapping identities in a non-confrontational way. Her approach was effective. The man stayed in the exam room after and decided he did want to get vaccinated. Motivational interviewing focuses on understanding people fully rather than direct persuasion. Netflix had a very permissive culture with few rules and an emphasis on performance and accountability. Employees had a lot of autonomy and were encouraged to challenge each other directly. In 2018, the head of communications used the N-word to compare it to the R-word when discussing offensive jokes in a comedy special. This upset many employees. While Netflix's culture allowed open discussion of sensitive topics, this incident highlighted tensions. Some saw it as an opportunity for understanding, while others felt it crossed a line. Previously, Netflix's culture had benefits like open debate and lack of hierarchy, but the direct feedback could also feel cruel at times. This incident exposed challenges in discussing issues related to identity and offense in their system. It marked a turning point and civil war over the company's approach. In summary, it describes Netflix's unique culture, but shows how an executive's comment about sensitive language topics ignited debate over discussing identity and offense within their radical transparency model. Here are the key points from the passage. Netflix's culture of open dissent and debate was shaken by an incident where Jonathan Friedland, head of communications, used a racial slur, the N-word, in a meeting. This highlighted tensions around issues of race and inclusion that some felt Netflix had been ignoring. There was disagreement within the company on how to handle the situation. After months, CEO Reed Hastings ultimately decided to fire Friedland, sending an email explaining the N-word was unacceptable. But this created confusion around what could and couldn't be said. Netflix hired new diversity executives, like Verna Myers, to address issues of equity and inclusion through dialogue. However, having sensitive conversations about identity is challenging in a culture that values scathing disagreement. The incident prompted deeper reflection on how to discuss the most sensitive topics related to race, gender, ethnicity, and more without causing hurt or backlash, especially in the workplace. It highlighted the complexity of tackling issues of prejudice and inequality. In summary, the passage examines how an incident involving a racial slur at Netflix sparked debate around inclusion and how to have respectful yet meaningful conversations about identity and social issues within its unconstrained culture. Here are the key points from the summary. Researchers studied conversations that led to discomfort or upset, trying to understand what exactly was said to cause negative reactions. They found that assigning someone to a group they didn't identify with, or denying them membership to a group they felt they belonged to, consistently caused anger and alienation. This is known as identity threat. Identity threats are common. Over 99% of study participants reported experiencing one in the past week, on average experiencing 11 threats. They occurred due to many personal attributes like race, wealth, occupation, etc. The mere possibility of identity threat often prevents discussions about race, ethnicity, and social issues. Starting discussions on an honest, informed basis is important for addressing problems like racism. Another study brought pairs of black and white friends together to discuss race-related experiences. The control group just received generic instructions, while the experimental group did a brief pre-discussion exercise to acknowledge discomfort. Think of benefits, obstacles, and ways to overcome obstacles. The pre-discussion exercise took only a few minutes and didn't dictate discussion content or manners, but aimed to better prepare participants psychologically for a challenging discussion. In summary, the researchers were exploring how to have more open discussions about difficult topics like race by understanding what causes discomfort and finding ways to mitigate identity threats and psychological barriers before conversation. Verna Myers was hired as Vice President of Inclusion Strategy at Netflix after Jonathan Friedland was fired. She had experience working on diversity initiatives at law firms and as a diversity consultant. When she arrived, Netflix said they opposed discrimination, but some doubted change was needed since they disliked racism and believed in equality. Myers knew this was not enough. The Netflix culture encouraged moving quickly with few rules and constraints. Employees were told to challenge everything and focus on being creative over preventing error. Myers knew how to get people to think more deeply before speaking. However, changing the culture would be challenging since Netflix valued speed and flexibility over careful consideration before acting or speaking. Her role was to help Netflix think about how to become a more inclusive workplace while still maintaining their innovative, fast-moving culture that pushed boundaries. It would not be easy to balance these goals. So in summary, Myers faced the difficult task of driving cultural change towards inclusion at Netflix while working within a culture that embraced few rules, quick actions, and challenging conventions without much consideration of consequences. Netflix's culture originally emphasized radical candor and ruthless honesty, but this led to sensitive topics like prejudice and bias being avoided due to fear of discussions going nuclear. VP of Inclusion Strategy, Verna Myers, and her team realized the company needed to have open discussions about hard issues to promote understanding, but these conversations needed clear guidelines to make everyone feel safe. Myers introduced diversity and inclusion workshops with guidelines that prohibited blaming, shaming, or attacking others. Participants were encouraged to share their own experiences and listen to others without judgment. The goal was not perfection, but gaining awareness of biases and perspectives. Discussions focused on creating a sense of belonging for all. There was initial fear and reluctance among employees to participate, but over time, thousands attended as it became clear mistakes would not be attacked, and discomfort was part of the learning process. By 2021, nearly all Netflix employees had received training on concepts of belonging, diversity, and inclusion through these ongoing interventions and guidelines. The company reported outpacing others in promoting representation and inclusion. Netflix has made strides in increasing diversity and representation within its workforce. Women make up over 50% of Netflix's workforce and senior leadership, and people from underrepresented ethnic racial groups make up around half of U.S. employees. However, Netflix faced backlash over Dave Chappelle's comedy special, The Closer, which was criticized for ridiculing and attacking the transgender community. There were both external protests and internal employee complaints. Netflix CEO Ted Sarandos initially defended the special, but later acknowledged he failed to listen to employee concerns. Netflix held multiple internal town halls where employees could voice criticisms and concerns. While there was disagreement over editorial decisions, employees said the discussions allowed open dialogue in an empathetic tone where all voices could be heard. While Netflix still has work to do, it has systems in place for listening to employee feedback, even on controversial issues. The ability to have difficult conversations is important for understanding different perspectives and moving forward. Hard conversations about identity, beliefs, and social issues can lead to obstacles like anxiety, tensions, or some participants withdrawing. To help overcome these obstacles, it's important to establish clear guidelines up front about respectful dialogue, set shared goals for the discussion, and acknowledge discomfort is natural and can provide learning. During the discussion, Efforts should be made to draw out diverse identities and perspectives. Ensure all feel equal and welcome. Acknowledge different experiences while finding genuine similarities, and manage the discussion environment. Even with planning, conversations may still become uncomfortable at times. The goal is to use such moments constructively to improve understanding rather than shut down. At the end, it's worth reminding participants why having an open yet respectful dialogue, despite potential risks, is so important for advancing important issues. The benefits of working through challenges can outweigh easier alternatives. So in summary, the key is being proactively aware of possible obstacles, having a thoughtful framework and shared goals established up front, and using any difficult moments as learning opportunities rather than reasons to avoid difficult discussion. The person described is Camille from the Harvard Grant Study, a long-term longitudinal research project studying adult development. When Camille was first studied as a young man, researchers predicted he would be unsuccessful and depressed based on coming from a dysfunctional family. However, when researchers followed up with Camille decades later, they found he had become very successful. He was married, a leader in his church, and founded a successful medical clinic. Camille was described as happy, joyful, and well-connected to others. He had rich relationships and was beloved by his community. In contrast, another participant from the early years named Marsden had a troubled personal life when researchers followed up. He was divorced, alienated from his family, and lonely. His law career was successful, but he had few close relationships. The researchers ultimately found that strong, warm relationships were the best predictor of happiness and health in older age. Camille's ability to form close connections helped him flourish, while Marsden's difficulty with relationships contributed to his unhappiness. The passage describes a man named Camille who had a difficult time forming real friendships until his 30s. He was very socially isolated. After a hospitalization, he joined a church and threw himself into social activities like committees and potlucks. This helped him start forming relationships. Researchers later found he became one of the most socially active people in the study. As his social network expanded, his career also took off. At age 75, he reflected that connecting with others had transformed his life. He said, "I learned love." The Harvard study found that having good relationships consistently correlated with better physical and mental health, as well as longer life. Numerous other studies have replicated this. Social isolation is shown to be more dangerous than health issues like diabetes. Connecting with others through conversations can make people healthier, happier, and more content. The passage is about how conversations can change our brains, bodies, and experience of the world. Forming relationships through long, intimate discussions was particularly impactful on well-being and longevity. So in summary, the passage discusses research showing that social connections and intimate conversations formed through relationships are extremely important for health, happiness, and longevity. Forming friendships later in life, like Camille did, can profoundly transform people. The passages discuss the importance of synchronizing brain activity, thoughts, behaviors, and physiology when connecting with others. Several scientific studies are cited that show how interacting brains can align through conversation, music performance, storytelling, and other joint activities. Neural synchrony and physiological entrainment are thought to underlie successful communication and shared understanding. This alignment may help establish rapport, cooperation, and social bonds between individuals. However, one source notes that entrainment is not guaranteed, and misalignments can still allow for meaningful interaction. The ability to align and steer each other's thoughts and behaviors is part of what makes social interactions dynamic. In general, the passages argue that synchronizing brain patterns and responses in real time, or neural simultaneity, may be a key mechanism enabling people to connect, understand each other, and form relationships against obstacles. But more research is still needed to fully understand brain-to-brain coupling during social interaction.